Every day, in countless interactions, unseen forces subtly nudge our thoughts, influence our decisions, and shape our perceptions. We navigate a complex landscape where a casual comment from a colleague, a persuasive advertisement, or even a seemingly innocent request from a loved one can carry the hidden weight of psychological manipulation. These aren't always grand, malicious schemes, but often small, almost imperceptible. Quote, that exploit the very wiring of our minds and the vulnerabilities of our spirit. They leverage our cognitive shortcuts, prey on our emotional responses, and tap into our deepest desires for belonging, security, or validation. This essay delves into the pervasive realm of man. Quote, 1. The everyday tactics people employ, often unconsciously to exert influence and control. We will explore these phenomena through a dual lens, integrating contemporary psychological research with timeless spiritual wisdom. From the psychological perspective, we will examine the cognitive biases, emotional triggers, and social dynamics that make us susceptible, drawing from fields like social psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience. Simultaneously, we will illuminate these patterns through spiritual traditions, exploring concepts of illusion, Maya, egoic attachment, the imperative for discernment, and the profound call to authenticity found in Buddhism, Christian contemplative thought, Sufism, Hindu philosophy, and existential wisdom. By weaving these perspectives together, we aim to not only unmask the mechanisms of manipulation, but also to cultivate a deeper inner resilience and spiritual freedom, transforming passive susceptibility into conscious awareness and empowered choice. Our journey begins by establishing a foundational understanding of how these tricks operate on both our mental faculties and our spiritual essence. We will first explore the inherent vulnerabilities within the human mind that manipulators exploit, then turn to the spiritual insights that frame manipulation as a distortion of truth, a product of ego, and a challenge to our spiritual awakening. Together, these lenses reveal that while dark psychology seeks to control our external reality, true freedom lies in reclaiming our inner landscape. The human mind, for all its brilliance, is not an impregnable fortress. It operates on heuristics, mental shortcuts designed for efficiency, not always for accuracy. These shortcuts, while essential for navigating a complex world, become fertile ground for those who understand how to exploit them. Dark psychology often begins by subtly leveraging these inherent cognitive biases, turning our natural inclinations against us. Consider the asan, confirmation bias, our tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our existing beliefs. A manipulator might feed us selective information that reinforces a narrative they want us to believe, knowing we are more likely to accept it without critical scrutiny. Similarly, the availability heuristic makes us overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled or vivid in our memory. By strategically planting fear-inducing stories or dramatic anecdotes, a manipulator can sway our perception of risk or reality. These are not grand illusions, but subtle shifts in emphasis, tone, or information delivery that capitalize on how our brains naturally process data. Beyond cognitive shortcuts, our emotional landscape is another prime target. Manipulators are adept at triggering emotions like fear, guilt, shame, or even intense desire, knowing that strong emotions can bypass rational thought. The fear of missing out, FOMO, for instance, is a powerful motivator in consumerism and social dynamics, urging us to conform or act impulsively to avoid perceived exclusion. Guilt trips, pity plays, or appeals to our desire for validation are daily occurrences, carefully crafted to elicit an emotional response that serves the manipulator's agenda. These tactics often operate below the threshold of conscious awareness, leaving us feeling uneasy or pressured without fully understanding why. From a psychological perspective, these tricks are not magic, but a sophisticated understanding of human behavior. They exploit our innate social programming, our need for belonging, our desire for certainty, and our aversion to loss. They operate by creating mental hooks that subtly redirect our attention, distort our perception of reality, and ultimately guide our actions in ways that benefit the manipulator. The power of these tricks lies in their subtlety, their ability to remain largely invisible, weaving themselves into the fabric of our daily interactions until they become normalized, almost expected. While psychology dissects the mechanics of the mind, spiritual traditions offer a profound framework for understanding why we are susceptible to deception, both from others and from ourselves. Many ancient wisdom traditions speak of a fundamental veil or illusion that obscures ultimate reality, often perpetuated by the ego self. In Eastern Buddhism, the concept of Maya, illusion, or samsara, the cycle of suffering driven by craving and delusion, directly addresses the mind's tendency to misperceive reality. Manipulation thrives when we are caught in the web of our desires, attachments, and aversions. The Buddha taught that suffering, dukkha, arises from tanha and craving, which includes the craving for existence, non-existence, and sensual pleasures. When a manipulator appeals to our desire for status, security, or even to avoid discomfort, they are tapping directly into these fundamental cravings, leveraging our unexamined attachments to control our actions. The Buddhist path emphasizes mindfulness and insight, vipassana, as tools to pierce through these illusions and see things as they truly are, fostering a radical discernment that resists external coercion. Christian contemplative thought speaks of the need for spiritual discernment, distinguishing between the voice of God, the voice of the ego, and the six, or deceptive forces. St. Paul warns against being deception, Ephesians 4:14. This highlights the vulnerability of an ungrounded spirit to persuasive, yet ultimately deceptive influences. The practice of contemplative prayer and self-examination aims to purify the heart and mind, strengthening one's inner compass against external manipulation and internal self-deception, guiding toward truth and authenticity. Sufi wisdom centers on purifying the nafs, the ego self, which is often described as prone to deception, self-aggrandizement, and attachment to worldly desires. The nafs can be seen as the inner collaborator of external manipulators, its unexamined cravings making us vulnerable to promises of power, pleasure, or validation. The Sufi path, through practices like dhikr, remembrance of God, and rigorous self-inquiry, seeks to transcend the deceptive layers of the ego, leading to fana, annihilation of the separate self, and a direct perception of truth. Until the nafs is disciplined, one remains susceptible to both outward trickery and inward delusion. Hindu and Vedantic philosophy also extensively explore the concept of Maya, the cosmic illusion that makes us perceive the transient world as ultimate reality and our individual ego as our true self. This illusion binds us to the cycle of samsara, Manipulators, consciously or unconsciously, exploit our identification with the ego and our belief in the solidity of Maya. They promise satisfaction within the illusory realm, diverting us from the deeper quest for Atman, the true self, and Brahman, ultimate reality. The spiritual disciplines of yoga, meditation, and self-inquiry aim to lift this veil, revealing the underlying unity and truth, thereby diminishing the power of external deceptions. From a spiritual vantage point, dark psychology tricks exploit our state of unawareness, our unexamined egoic desires, and our identification with the illusory self. They thrive in the absence of inner clarity and discernment. The spiritual journey, therefore, is not merely about resisting external manipulation, but about cultivating an inner state of authenticity, self-awareness, and profound connection to truth that renders such tricks ineffective. It is a call to awaken from the dream of illusion and to live from a place of genuine freedom. Having established the bedrock of our susceptibility, our inherent cognitive shortcuts, and the egoic vulnerabilities that manipulators exploit, we now turn our gaze to the specific instruments of manipulation. These dark psychology tricks are not always grand, dramatic gestures. More often they are subtle, almost imperceptible nudges that, over time, can steer our thoughts, emotions, and actions far from our authentic selves. Understanding these specific mechanisms is the next crucial step in dismantling their power and cultivating an inner landscape resilient to external influence. One of the most insidious dark psychology tricks is gaslighting, a tactic so subtle and pervasive it can slowly erode our sense of reality and self-trust. Psychologically, gaslighting operates by systematically making us question our perceptions, memories, and sanity. A manipulator might deny events that clearly happened. "That never occurred. You're imagining things." Contradict our feelings. "You're being too sensitive. I didn't mean it that way." Or subtly shift blame, turning our legitimate concerns into evidence of our own instability. This relentless invalidation creates profound cognitive dissonance, forcing us into a state of confusion where we begin to distrust our own judgment and increasingly rely on the manipulator's version of reality. The goal is to destabilize us, making us more pliable and dependent, less likely to challenge their narratives or assert our independence. From a spiritual perspective, gaslighting is a direct assault on our connection to truth and our inner knowing. It is the active weaving of Maya, an illusion designed to obscure our spiritual clarity. When our perceptions are consistently denied, we are systematically disconnected from the divine spark within that guides us towards authenticity. The ego, already prone to seeking external validation, becomes utterly disoriented, unable to discern its own experience from the distorted reflections presented by the manipulator. This trick exploits our deepest need for certainty, twisting it into a weapon that alienates us from our own spiritual compass, leaving us adrift in a sea of manufactured doubt. To recognize gaslighting is to reclaim our sovereign right to our own experience, to trust the quiet voice of our intuition over the loud, disorienting pronouncements of another. Another potent trick, particularly prevalent in the early stages of manipulative relationships, is love bombing, often followed by a devastating idealization-devaluation cycle. Psychologically, love bombing involves an overwhelming display of affection, flattery, intense attention, and rapid declarations of intimacy. We are showered with compliments, gifts, and promises, creating an immediate, intoxicating bond. This floods our brains with dopamine and oxytocin, making us feel uniquely cherished and understood. This intense positive reinforcement taps into our fundamental human need for connection, validation, and belonging, often bypassing our rational defenses. The manipulator quickly identifies our unmet needs and desires, then crafts an image of themselves as our perfect soulmate or savior. However, this idealization is merely a facade. Once we are hooked, emotionally invested, and often isolated from our usual support systems, the devaluation begins. The manipulator subtly or overtly withdraws affection, criticizes our perceived flaws, and demeans our worth. This sudden shift creates immense confusion and anxiety as we desperately try to regain the initial rare quote state. We might blame ourselves, work harder to please them, or tolerate increasingly unacceptable behavior, all in a desperate attempt to return to the idealized phase. This cycle creates a powerful trauma bond where our self-worth becomes inextricably linked to the manipulator's approval, making escape incredibly difficult. Spiritually, love-bombing exploits tanha, our craving for affection and attachment, and the ego's insatiable desire for external validation. It creates a false sense of spiritual connection, a superficial intimacy that diverts us from true self-love and authentic spiritual growth. By attaching our sense of worth to another's fleeting adoration, we become trapped in a samsaric cycle of seeking external approval, perpetually chasing a high that is deliberately withheld. The manipulator becomes a false god, dictating our emotional and spiritual state. Recognizing this cycle requires us to cultivate an inner wellspring of self-worth, understanding that true love and validation arise from within, not from the conditional and manipulative gestures of another. The foot-in-the-door technique is a classic compliance strategy that leverages our psychological need for consistency. Psychologically, it works by first asking us to agree to a small, often trivial request that is difficult to refuse. Once we comply, we are more likely to agree to a subsequent larger request, even if it's something we might have initially resisted. Our minds, striving for cognitive consistency, rationalize our initial compliance by forming a new self-perception. I am the kind of person who helps out, or I agree with this cause. This subtle shift in self-perception then makes us more amenable to the next, more significant request, as refusing would create internal dissonance and challenge our newly formed identity. This technique is often used in sales, fundraising, and even in personal relationships to gradually escalate demands. From a spiritual perspective, the foot-in-the-door technique subtly erodes our boundaries and our authentic will, pulling us away from our spiritual center by increments. Each small compliance, seemingly harmless, represents a tiny deviation from our inner truth or our highest good. It exploits the ego's desire to maintain a consistent self-image, even if that image is being sculpted by external forces. We become entangled in a web of obligations and agreements that were not genuinely our own, slowly losing touch with our own discernment and the clarity of our spiritual path. This technique highlights how small, unconscious compromises can lead us far astray, one subtle step at a time, away from our core values and spiritual freedom. Awareness means pausing before even the smallest request, assessing its alignment with our deepest intentions. Finally, the dark psychology tricks of scarcity and urgency prey on our fundamental fears of loss and missing out, triggering impulsive decision-making. Psychologically, these tactics operate by limiting the perceived availability of an item, opportunity, or even a person's attention, or by imposing a strict time limit on a decision. Phrases like limited stock, offer ends soon, only a few spots left, or my time is very precious, activate our innate aversion to loss. We tend to value things more when they are scarce or difficult to obtain, and the pressure of urgency bypasses rational thought, pushing us towards immediate action to avoid the perceived pain of missing out, FOMO, as discussed in Chapter 1. This creates a state of heightened anxiety where reasoned consideration is replaced by reactive urgency, making us vulnerable to poor choices. Spiritually, scarcity and urgency amplify vasatana, our craving for possessions, experiences, or even validation, and deepen our attachment to transient desires. They exploit the illusion that external scarcity equates to internal lack, pulling us into the material world and away from the inherent abundance of our spiritual nature. This constant chase for what is limited or about to expire distracts us from cultivating inner peace and contentment, reinforcing the ego's belief that our happiness depends on external acquisitions or opportunities. It creates a relentless cycle of anxiety and dissatisfaction, preventing us from resting at the present moment and recognizing the boundless resources of our own spirit. To resist these tactics is to cultivate a deep trust in our own inner worth and sufficiency, knowing that true value is not defined by external availability or fleeting opportunities. These specific tricks, whether eroding our reality, manufacturing false intimacy, subtly coercing compliance, or inducing panic through scarcity, are but facets of the broader landscape of dark psychology. Recognizing their patterns is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is the vital first step in reclaiming our sovereignty, rebuilding our inner fortress, and asserting our conscious choice in a world often obscured by manipulative veils. In our subsequent exploration, we will delve into the practical strategies for dismantling these influences and cultivating the discernment that leads to true liberation. Having unveiled the subtle architects of our reality and dissected the mechanics of their daily machinations, our journey now pivots from recognition to active fortification. It is not enough merely to identify the shadows. We must learn to illuminate them, to dismantle their power, and to cultivate an inner citadel that stands impervious to their insidious influence. This chapter marks our passage from passive observation to proactive empowerment, equipping us with the psychological and spiritual strategies necessary to reclaim our sovereignty and navigate the complex landscapes of human interaction with discernment and resilience. We begin the vital work of fortifying our inner world, transforming ourselves from unwitting targets into conscious architects of our own experience. The first line of defense against dark psychology lies in strengthening our cognitive and emotional faculties. Manipulators thrive on our unawareness, our unexamined assumptions, and our reactive emotional responses. By sharpening our mental tools, we can systematically dismantle the very mechanisms they exploit. The most immediate and potent psychological defense is the conscious act of awareness, coupled with labeling. When we encounter a situation that feels, quote 19, a statement that twists our reality, or an overwhelming display of affection that seems disproportionate, we must pause. This pause is a crucial interstice, a moment to step outside the immediate emotional pull and engage our analytical mind. Is this gaslighting, attempting to make us doubt our memory or perception? Is this love bombing, designed to create a rapid, intense bond for later exploitation? Are we being nudged by scarcity or urgency, pressured into a decision before rational thought can intervene? By explicitly naming the tactic, we immediately diminish its power. It transforms an amorphous, unsettling feeling into a concrete, identifiable phenomenon. This cognitive act creates a boundary, separating us from the manipulator's narrative. It allows us to recognize that the discomfort is not a flaw within us, but rather a symptom of an external manipulation attempt. We shift from being immersed in the experience to observing it, creating a critical distance essential for objective evaluation. This is the first step in disarming the mental hooks that manipulators attempt to embed within our consciousness. Manipulators are masters at triggering our emotions, knowing that a mind flooded with fear, guilt, desire, or even intense joy is less capable of rational thought. Our inherent vulnerabilities, the fear of missing out, FOMO, the desire for acceptance, the aversion to conflict, the yearning for love, are their primary targets. Therefore, cultivating robust emotional intelligence and regulation is paramount. This involves several key practices. Firstly, recognizing our emotional state in real time. Are we feeling pressured, flattered, anxious, or guilty? What is the source of these emotions? Secondly, understanding the potential manipulative intent behind triggers. If someone is pushing us with a tight deadline and a limited time offer, we recognize that the fear of loss is being intentionally weaponized. Thirdly, practicing emotional regulation techniques. This might involve taking a few deep breaths to calm the nervous system, mentally stepping back from the immediate interaction, or employing cognitive reappraisal, consciously reinterpreting a situation to change our emotional response. For instance, instead of feeling guilty when a manipulator implies we are letting them down, we can reappraise the situation as an attempt to control us through guilt, thus detaching from the intended emotional impact. By learning to observe our emotions without being immediately overwhelmed by them, we deny manipulators the direct access they seek to our decision-making faculties. The erosion of personal boundaries is a hallmark of many manipulative relationships. The foot-in-the-door technique, for example, systematically breaches boundaries incrementally. To counter this, we must cultivate the unwavering ability to set and enforce clear, unambiguous boundaries. This is not about being rigid or unyielding, but about honoring our authentic self, our values, and our well-being. Setting boundaries involves articulating what we are and are not willing to accept, do, or tolerate. This can be challenging, especially for those accustomed to people-pleasing or fearing conflict. However, a firm no, delivered calmly and without excessive explanation or apology, is a powerful assertion of personal agency. It communicates that our choices are our own and that our personal space, physical, emotional, and mental, is sacred. Maintaining boundaries requires consistency. Manipulators will often test them repeatedly. Each time we uphold a boundary, we reinforce our self-respect and teach others how we expect to be treated. This practice builds an internal scaffold of self-worth. making us less susceptible to the subtle encroachments of manipulative tactics. Gaslighting thrives on our isolation and the systematic dismantling of our trust in our own perceptions. To combat this, and indeed all forms of psychological distortion, we must actively cultivate critical thinking and engage in objective reality testing. This means questioning narratives, seeking corroborating evidence, and not internalizing contradictory information without scrutiny. When confronted with statements that deny our experience, "That never happened," "You're too sensitive," "You're imagining things," instead of immediately doubting ourselves, we must pause and evaluate. Do our memories align with the stated facts? Can we cross-reference information with reliable sources or trusted individuals? Journaling our experiences can serve as an invaluable record, providing concrete evidence against gaslighting attempts. Discussing confusing or unsettling interactions with a trusted friend, family member, or therapist can also provide an external perspective, helping us to differentiate between genuine misunderstandings and deliberate manipulation. By actively seeking external validation for our reality, we build a robust defense against the insidious fog of psychological distortion. Ultimately, many dark psychology tricks prey on our inherent human need for validation, acceptance, and security. Love bombing exploits our desire for affection, while gaslighting attacks our self-trust, making us dependent on the manipulator for our sense of reality. The most profound psychological defense, therefore, lies in cultivating a deep sense of self-trust and learning to validate ourselves internally. This involves recognizing our inherent worth, independent of external praise or criticism. It means trusting our intuition, even when others try to undermine it. It requires an ongoing practice of self-reflection, understanding our values, strengths, and weaknesses, and aligning our actions with our authentic self. When we are internally validated, the manipulative allure of external approval diminishes. The withdrawal of affection in a devaluation cycle loses its sting because our sense of self-worth is not predicated on another's fickle approval. The fear of missing out lessens when we are content with our own path and choices. By nurturing an unshakable belief in ourselves, we become less susceptible to the shifting sands of external manipulation and stand firm in our own truth. Beyond the psychological strategies, the timeless wisdom of spiritual traditions offers profound pathways to liberation from manipulative influences. These practices address the deeper spiritual vulnerabilities that Chapter 1 explored, such as the ego's attachments, tanha, and its susceptibility to illusion, maya. By anchoring ourselves in a deeper spiritual reality, we render the superficial games of manipulation impotent. The incessant chatter of the mind, often driven by the nafs or ego self, creates fertile ground for manipulation. It is in this internal noise that our fears, desires, and insecurities amplify, making us more susceptible to external triggers. Spiritual traditions universally advocate for practices that cultivate inner silence and mindfulness, such as meditation, contemplative prayer, or focused breathwork. By regularly engaging in these practices, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without immediate identification or reaction. This creates a sacred internal space, a sanctuary where the manipulative hooks cannot easily grasp. When a manipulator attempts to trigger our fear of loss or our desire for external validation, The mindful individual can observe the arising emotion without being swept away by it. This is not about suppressing emotions, but about developing the capacity to witness them, understand their transient nature, and choose our response consciously rather than reacting impulsively. Quieting the nafs allows us to hear the subtle voice of our inner wisdom, which is often drowned out by the ego's demands and the external clamour of manipulation. Many spiritual traditions, particularly Hinduism and Vedanta, speak of Maya, the cosmic illusion that obscures ultimate reality. From a spiritual perspective, manipulation is a micro-level manifestation of Maya, intentionally weaving a web of deceit to obscure the truth of a situation or a person's intentions. Spiritual discernment, therefore, becomes a crucial tool for piercing this veil. This discernment is cultivated not through intellectual analysis alone, but through a deepening connection to an inner sense of truth. Practices like honest self-inquiry, prayer for guidance, and reflection on ethical principles help us attune to a higher standard of truth and integrity. When confronted with gaslighting, for instance, a spiritually discerning individual might feel an internal dissonance, a subtle knowing that something is fundamentally untrue, even if they cannot immediately articulate why. This inner compass, honed through spiritual practice, becomes an infallible guide, allowing us to perceive the genuine intentions behind words and actions, distinguishing authentic connection from calculated manipulation and seeing through the illusions woven by the egoic games of others. Chapter 1 highlighted Tana, craving and attachment, as a primary vulnerability to manipulation. Scarcity and urgency prey on our attachment to possessions and opportunities, while love bombing exploits our attachment to external affection. Spiritual traditions offer the profound practice of detachment, e.g. Vairagya in Hinduism, non-attachment in Buddhism, as a path to freedom. Detachment does not imply indifference or apathy. Rather, it is the wisdom to recognize that true peace and fulfillment do not depend on external acquisitions, relationships, or even outcomes. When we are detached from the need for a specific outcome, the urgency of a limited time offer loses its grip. When we are detached from the need for external validation, the withdrawal of affection in a devaluation cycle ceases to wound us so deeply. This practice liberates us from the emotional blackmail inherent in many manipulative tactics. By reducing our attachments, we diminish the surface area for manipulators to exploit, rendering their emotional hooks ineffective. Our inner peace becomes less conditional, less susceptible to the whims and agendas of others. At the very heart of spiritual defense lies the cultivation of a deep, unwavering connection to our authentic self, our spiritual essence, which transcends the ego. Nafs. This is the unassailable core that no manipulation can truly touch. Whether understood as the divine spark within, the true self, Atman, or the Christ consciousness, this inner reality is the source of our inherent worth, wisdom, and strength. When we are deeply rooted in this authentic self, our identity is not defined by external circumstances, the opinions of others, or the fleeting promises of manipulators. We become impervious to the subtle assaults on our self-worth, because our worth is recognized as intrinsic and divine. The manipulator's attempts to diminish us, control us, or exploit our desires become like whispers against a mountain. They may be heard, but they cannot move us. This profound connection is the ultimate antidote to the spiritual dis-ease that manipulation seeks to create. It empowers us to live from a place of integrity, peace, and unshakable self-possession, making us architects of our own reality, not subjects of another's design. Our journey through this chapter has illuminated the dual pathways of psychological and spiritual fortification. We have explored how disciplined awareness, emotional mastery, clear boundaries, critical thought, and self-trust build an impregnable psychological defense. Simultaneously, we have delved into the spiritual practices of inner silence, discernment, detachment, and connection to the authentic self, which anchor us in an unshakable spiritual reality. The integration of these strategies transforms us from vulnerable recipients of manipulation into conscious, resilient beings. This is not a task completed overnight, but an ongoing practice, a continuous tending of our inner citadel. By diligently applying these principles, we not only protect ourselves from the dark currents of daily manipulation, but also embark on a profound journey of self-discovery and liberation, moving ever closer to a life of genuine autonomy and spiritual freedom. Our journey through the labyrinthine pathways of daily manipulation has thus far unveiled the insidious nature of dark psychological tricks, and illuminated the profound wisdom embedded within spiritual traditions for their discernment and neutralization. In Chapter 3, we meticulously detailed distinct psychological and spiritual defense mechanisms, presenting them as powerful tools in our arsenal. Yet the true potency of these strategies does not lie in their isolated application, but rather in their seamless integration. It is in the harmonious interplay between our awakened intellect and our deepened spiritual awareness that we forge an inner sanctuary, an impregnable fortress capable of withstanding the most subtle and sophisticated assaults on our autonomy. We contend that to truly become masters of our inner landscape, we must transcend the artificial dichotomy between the psychological and the spiritual. These are not separate realms of defense, but rather two sides of the same coin, each enriching and empowering the other. Psychological awareness, with its precise identification of cognitive biases, emotional triggers, and manipulative patterns, provides us with the diagnostic tools to recognize when our reality is being subtly distorted. It equips us with the language and framework to label the gaslighting, the love bombing, or the scarcity tactic as it unfolds. This intellectual clarity is indispensable, preventing us from being swept away by the emotional tide stirred by a manipulator. However, intellectual understanding alone, while crucial, often proves insufficient against the deeply entrenched vulnerabilities of the human spirit. Herein lies the indispensable role of spiritual wisdom, where psychology helps us understand how manipulation works. Spirituality addresses why we are susceptible in the first place, our attachments, tanha, our egoic desires, nafs, and our entanglement in the illusion, maya. Spiritual practices such as inner silence, mindfulness, and detachment do not merely offer a passive retreat. They actively cultivate the inner strength and resilience required to resist the allure of false promises and the sting of manufactured fear. They anchor us to an authentic self, a core of inherent worth that remains untouched by external validation or condemnation. Consider the synergy. When confronted with a master manipulator employing the foot in the oar technique, our psychological awareness immediately flags the incremental requests and the subtle pressure for consistency. We recognize the pattern, but it is our spiritual practice of boundary setting, born from a deep reverence for our authentic self and a detachment from the need to please, that grants us the unwavering resolve to say no without guilt or hesitation. The psychological insight identifies the trap. The spiritual grounding empowers us to step away from it. Similarly, if we find ourselves caught in the intoxicating whirlwind of love bombing, our psychological intelligence discerns the pattern of intense, rapid idealization, often followed by devaluation. It signals a red flag. Yet it is our spiritual cultivation of self-trust and internal validation, honed through practices that connect us to our inherent worth, that allows us to see through the superficiality and resist the craving for external affection, Tanya. We recognize that true love does not need to be earned through compliance or performance, but flows from an authentic wellspring within. This integrated approach is the very foundation upon which we build our inner fortress. Psychologically, its walls are constructed from robust critical thinking, allowing us to scrutinize narratives and test them against objective reality. Its gates are fortified with clear, permeable yet firm boundaries, defining what we will and will not tolerate. Its watchtowers are manned by acute emotional intelligence, enabling us to differentiate between genuine connection and manipulative ploys designed to exploit our feelings. The very air within this fortress is charged with self-trust and internal validation, rendering us immune to the desperate search for external approval. Spiritually, this fortress is permeated by the pervasive calm of inner silence, a space where the incessant chatter of the ego, nafs, can be hushed, allowing the voice of intuition and truth to emerge. Its foundations are laid upon the bedrock of discernment, piercing through the veil of illusion, Maya, to perceive reality as it truly is, unclouded by projections or distorted narratives. The inner chambers are adorned with the liberating practice of detachment, releasing the mental hooks of desire and fear as tanha, that manipulators so readily exploit. At its very heart resides the authentic self, an unassailable core of consciousness, wisdom, and inherent worth, a sanctuary that no external force can penetrate or diminish. This integrated fortress is not a static structure but a living, breathing entity, constantly maintained and refined through ongoing practice. The journey of building and maintaining this inner fortress is not a one-time endeavor, but a continuous, lifelong practice. The landscape of human interaction is dynamic, and the architects of manipulation are ever evolving, refining their tactics to exploit new vulnerabilities in our collective consciousness. Therefore, our vigilance must be ceaseless, our self-awareness ever sharpening. We must recognize that the battle, if one chooses to frame it as such, is not merely against external manipulators, but often, and more subtly, against our own internal biases, attachments, and the ego's propensity for self-deception. Indeed, the most insidious manipulator can sometimes reside within our own minds. Our own cognitive biases, left unchecked, can lead us to self-manipulation, reinforcing narratives that soothe our ego or confirm our pre-existing beliefs, even if they deviate from truth. The nafs, in its various manifestations, can trick us into pursuing fleeting desires or succumbing to fears that ultimately detract from our true well-being. Here, the integrated approach becomes profoundly self-referential. We must apply the same psychological tools of critical thought and reality testing to our own internal monologues, questioning our assumptions and challenging our own emotional reactions. Spiritually, practices like mindfulness and self-inquiry allow us to observe the machinations of our own ego without judgment, recognizing its patterns and gradually detaching from its compulsive directives. This deeper level of self-mastery is perhaps the most crucial step, for only by conquering the internal realm can we truly be free from external sway. The ultimate goal of this profound integration is not merely defense, but the active cultivation of authentic freedom and self-mastery. It is about moving beyond a reactive stance against manipulation to a proactive state of conscious living. When our psychological acuity is harmonized with our spiritual depth, we cease to be unwitting pawns in the games of others. Instead, we become the conscious architects of our own reality, making choices rooted in integrity, truth, and inner peace. We learn to discern genuine connection from calculated exploitation, to differentiate between authentic empowerment and subtle control. Consider the practical implications of this integrated awareness in daily life. When a social media platform leverages scarcity and urgency to push a purchase, our psychological awareness recognizes the tactic, while our spiritual detachment from material desires ensures we are not impulsively swayed. When a colleague attempts to gaslight us regarding a past event, our psychological reality testing holds firm to our memory, and our spiritual grounding in inner truth prevents us from doubting our sanity. When a new acquaintance showers us with excessive flattery, our psychological intelligence flags the love-bombing pattern, and our spiritual self-worth, rooted in our authentic self, renders us impervious to the need for such external validation. This journey transforms us from vulnerable individuals, susceptible to every passing psychological current, into sovereign beings. We shift from being reactive to circumstances to becoming conscious creators of our experience. This liberation is not merely freedom from external control, but freedom for living a life aligned with our highest values and deepest truths. It is a profound awakening to our inherent power and an unwavering commitment to cultivating a reality defined by clarity, integrity, and genuine spiritual freedom. The inner fortress, therefore, is not a prison that isolates us, but a sanctuary that empowers us to engage with the world from a place of unshakable strength and wisdom. Having constructed our impregnable, quote 39, a testament to the seamless integration of psychological acumen and spiritual profundity, we now stand at a pivotal threshold. Chapter 4 illuminated the intricate architecture of this sanctuary, emphasizing its role not merely as a shield against external manipulation, but as a crucible for self-mastery. We learned that true resilience emerges from this synergy, transforming us from potential targets into sovereign architects of our own reality. But what does life truly look like after this profound internal transformation? How does the world appear when the veil of unawareness is lifted? And how do we navigate its complexities, not just defensively, but proactively, with newfound clarity and purpose? The initial shift, once the inner fortress is established and maintained, is a profound alteration in perception. It is akin to shedding a long-worn pair of smudged spectacles, suddenly revealing the world in sharp, vibrant detail. The landscape of human interaction, once a confusing morass of unspoken tensions and inexplicable behaviours, now resolves into discernible patterns. We begin to see the subtle currents of influence, the unspoken agendas, and the unconscious triggers that drive so much of daily discourse. This is not to say that the world becomes an inherently malicious place. Rather, it becomes a transparent one. The Maya, the grand illusion of separate and competing selves driven by egoic impulses, begins to thin, allowing us glimpses of the underlying machinery. Our refined awareness, sharpened by both psychological discernment and spiritual insight, allows us to recognize the cognitive biases and egoic drives, not only within ourselves but also within others. The confirmation bias, the availability heuristic, the subtle appeals to fear or desire, these are no longer abstract concepts but visible threads in the tapestry of communication. When someone attempts to gaslight, we no longer doubt our reality. We observe the tactic for what it is. When love bombing commences, we sense the underlying agenda, recognizing the tanha, the craving for validation it seeks to exploit. This clarity is not accompanied by cynicism, but by a dispassionate, almost scientific observation. We understand that many individuals engaging in these behaviors are themselves unwitting participants in the great cosmic play, driven by their own unexamined nafs, or ego, often unaware of the impact of their actions. The quote 40 stern of manipulation, once insidious and invisible, becomes visible. We see the mental success quote 40.1 being cast, the attempts to anchor us to external validation, to fear of loss, or to the illusion of scarcity. But having cultivated detachment, vairagya, and rooted ourselves in the authentic self, these hooks find no purchase. The emotional triggers, once capable of sending us spiraling, are now observed with a calm centeredness. We are no longer merely players reacting to external stimuli. We are observers, capable of choosing our response from a place of inner freedom. This unveiling is liberating, for it dissolves the confusion and self-doubt that manipulation thrives upon, replacing it with a quiet, unwavering certainty. The quote, St. 42. Formidable as it is not a mere bunker for retreat. It is a launch pad. Once our boundaries are secure and our inner landscape is protected from invasive influences, our energy shifts from reactive defense to proactive self-creation. This is where we fully embody the role of architects of our own reality. The focus moves beyond simply avoiding what we don't want to consciously cultivating what we do. With the noise of external manipulation significantly attenuated, the voice of our authentic self, our higher consciousness, our inherent wisdom, becomes clearer and more resonant. We gain the capacity for conscious choice, not just in resisting manipulation, but in actively shaping our lives. What energies, relationships, and environments do we choose to invite into this sacred space we have cultivated? This is a question answered not by external pressures or societal expectations, but by a deep, internal resonance with our highest values and purpose. We begin to manifest intentions that are truly aligned with our inner truth, rather than reacting to the endless stream of external demands and projected desires. This phase of conscious design involves several key practices. Firstly, it requires setting clear, internally validated intentions. No longer swayed by FOMO or the pursuit of fleeting gratification, we define our purpose with precision, guided by our core values. Secondly, it necessitates aligning our actions with these values, ensuring that our external life reflects our internal state. This might involve significant re-evaluation of career paths, living situations, or even long-held beliefs that no longer serve our authentic expression. Thirdly, it demands the cultivation of a life of purpose, where every choice, every interaction, and every endeavor contributes to a coherent, meaningful existence. We become the conscious sculptors of our days, deliberately infusing them with meaning and intentionality, rather than allowing them to be dictated by the currents of external influence or the subtle pulls of unseen manipulators. The fortress, once a place of refuge, now transforms into a vibrant creative studio where the masterpiece of our life is actively brought into being. Perhaps one of the most profound impacts of this internal transformation is its effect on our relationships. The crucible of human connection, often a source of both profound joy and deep pain, becomes a space for forging authentic bonds, purified by the fire of discernment and self-awareness. Toxic dynamics, once subtle and confusing, now stand in stark relief. The patterns of gaslighting, devaluation, or boundary erosion become immediately apparent, no longer tolerable within the sacred space of our cultivated inner sovereignty. The ability to discern genuine connection from manipulative attempts becomes second nature. We learn to differentiate between love that seeks to uplift and control that masquerades as care. The intuitive cues, once dulled by self-doubt or the craving for external validation, are now sharp and reliable. Our inner compass guides us toward relationships founded on mutual respect, honesty, and shared growth, and away from those that seek to exploit, diminish, or control. This isn't about becoming isolated or cynical. It's about elevating the quality of our connections, choosing depth and authenticity over superficiality and manipulation. The courage to walk away from what does not serve our highest good becomes an inherent strength. This separation is not born of anger or resentment, but of a clear understanding of what aligns with our authentic self and what does not. We understand that true compassion sometimes means establishing firm boundaries, even if it causes temporary discomfort for others. Furthermore, within truly authentic relationships, we discover a new capacity for vulnerability. This vulnerability is not the kind that can be exploited, but a conscious, empowered opening of the heart to those who have demonstrated their capacity for genuine empathy and respect. It is a shared journey of growth, where both individuals are committed to mutual upliftment, honoring each other's inherent worth and sovereignty. The fortress, while strong, has gates that open wide to genuine connection, allowing the enriching flow of true intimacy to enter and deepen our experience of life. Our individual transformation, though deeply personal, does not exist in a vacuum. Just as a single drop creates ripples on the surface of water, our conscious living inevitably creates a ripple effect in the collective world. We become beacons of awareness, not necessarily by preaching or proselytizing, but by the sheer force of our authentic presence. Our unwavering inner sovereignty, our clear boundaries, and our commitment to truth can subtly shift the dynamics of any interaction or environment we enter. When confronted with manipulative tactics, our calm, centered response, or even our simple refusal to engage, can disarm the manipulator or, at the very least, prevent the tactic from taking root. This often prompts others to question, to observe, and perhaps even to begin their own journey of awakening. We inspire by example, demonstrating that it is possible to navigate the complexities of life with integrity and freedom, even amidst pervasive influences. This is a form of testosterone. Quote, Lesson 43. Living authentically as a quiet yet powerful resistance against the unconscious currents that seek to control and diminish human potential. Moreover, our developed discernment extends beyond individual interactions. We begin to perceive the broader systemic manipulations at play in society, in media narratives, advertising strategies, political rhetoric, and cultural conditioning. The same psychological principles and egoic appeals used in personal manipulation are amplified on a grand scale. We see how fear, scarcity, and the promise of belonging are leveraged to influence collective behavior. With this expanded awareness, we become more discerning consumers of information, more critical citizens, and more conscious participants in the collective dialogue. We contribute to a more conscious collective, one interaction, one informed choice, and one authentic expression at a time, thereby subtly raising the overall vibration of awareness in the world. Our fortress, while protecting us, also provides a vantage point from which to observe and wisely engage with the larger societal landscape. It is crucial to understand that this journey of cultivating inner sovereignty is not a destination, but a perpetual dawn, a continuous unfolding, a lifelong practice. The R-Quota 44 is not built once and for all. It requires constant maintenance, vigilant awareness, and continuous refinement. Life, in its infinite complexity, will always present new challenges, new forms of subtle manipulation, and new opportunities for our own internal shadows to emerge and test our resolve. The Maya will continue to weave its intricate illusions, and the Nafs will occasionally whisper its old temptations. New technologies and evolving social dynamics may give rise to novel manipulative tactics. Therefore, the practice of mindfulness, self-inquiry, and spiritual discipline remains essential. We must continuously check our internal compass, question our motivations, and ensure that our actions remain aligned with our authentic self. This involves embracing imperfection, acknowledging our vulnerabilities not as weaknesses, but as areas for continued growth, and learning from every experience. The path of sovereignty is not about achieving a static state of perfection, but about the dynamic, ongoing process of becoming more fully ourselves. The ultimate freedom we seek is not the absence of external influence, for that is an impossibility in an interconnected world. Rather, it is the unwavering internal sovereignty, the unshakable knowing of who we are, independent of external validation or manipulation. It is the capacity to choose our response, to align with our highest truth, and to live with integrity and purpose, regardless of the external circumstances. This is the joy of continuous awakening, the profound peace that comes from knowing we are the architects of our own reality, forever building, refining, and expanding the luminous sanctuary of our authentic self. The dawn breaks anew each day, inviting us to step into our power with renewed awareness and unwavering commitment. The quote we spoke of in our previous discussions is not a singular event, a switch flipped to permanent illumination, but rather an ongoing, ever-brightening process. It signifies a continuous unfolding, a daily recommitment to the principles of awareness, discernment, and authenticity that we have meticulously cultivated. Our journey does not conclude with the initial dismantling of manipulative patterns. Instead, It deepens, evolving into a sophisticated practice of refining our perception and fortifying our inner sanctuary against ever more subtle incursions, both from the external world and from within ourselves. As the grosser manifestations of Maya begin to recede, and the blatant hooks of dark psychology lose their grip, we find ourselves entering a new phase of awareness. This phase is characterized by an acute sensitivity to the nuances of human interaction and the quiet whispers of our own internal landscape. The manipulators of this world, though stripped of their overt power over us, do not vanish. Instead, their tactics may become more sophisticated, more veiled, demanding an even finer degree of discernment. Where once we saw obvious gaslighting or love bombing, we now might detect the faint scent of passive aggression, the subtle pressure of social conformity, or the insidious pull of collective narratives designed to sway opinion and dictate behavior. This requires a constant recalibration of our internal compass, a perpetual honing of our critical faculties, and an unwavering commitment to our inner truth. The Ascesis quote 46. Once established, demands continuous maintenance and subtle enhancements. We learn that while external threats are significant, the most persistent challenges often arise from within. Our own lingering cognitive biases, the vestiges of past conditioning, and the cunning machinations of the anaps, the egoic self, can still present formidable obstacles. This internal vigilance becomes paramount. It is no longer merely about identifying their tricks, but about recognizing our own blind spots, the unconscious assumptions that can still lead us astray. We delve deeper into self-inquiry, examining the roots of our reactions, the subtle desires das tanha that might still pull us, and the remnants of fear that could be exploited. This refinement of the inner fortress involves several key dimensions. Psychologically, it means advancing beyond basic emotional regulation to a state of profound emotional intelligence, where we not only understand our feelings, but also the complex interplay of emotions within social dynamics. We become adept at recognizing projection, transference, and countertransference, not just in therapeutic contexts, but in everyday conversations. Our boundaries, once firmly set, become more fluid yet equally resilient, capable of adapting to diverse situations without compromising our integrity. We learn to say, quote 47, not just out of self-preservation, but out of a deeper alignment with our authentic self, understanding that every, quote 40est, to what does not serve us is a quote vers to our true purpose. Spiritually, this phase of refinement takes us deeper into the practices of inner silence and detachment, vairagya. While initially these practices helped us quiet the external noise and loosen our grip on transient desires, they now serve to reveal the subtler layers of self-deception. We begin to discern the difference between authentic spiritual insight and egoic appropriation of spiritual concepts. The Maya is not just external illusion, but also the internal narratives we construct about ourselves and the world, often rooted in unexamined beliefs. Through sustained meditation and contemplative practices, we cultivate an inner spaciousness that allows us to observe our thoughts and emotions without identification, detaching from the stories they tell, and resting in the pure awareness of the authentic self. This deepens our connection to the unshakable core of our being, making us less susceptible to the shifting sands of external validation or criticism. Living a life of integrity, purpose, and unshakable freedom, then, is the natural outcome of this ongoing refinement. Integrity ceases to be a mere ethical choice and becomes an intrinsic state of being, a seamless alignment between our thoughts, words, and actions. We operate from a place of radical honesty, first with ourselves and then with others. This means acknowledging our own imperfections, taking responsibility for our energy, and communicating our truth with clarity and compassion. There is no longer a need to wear masks or conform to external expectations, for the validation we seek is found within, in the congruence of our being. Our purpose, once perhaps a nebulous aspiration, begins to clarify and emanate effortlessly from this integrated state. Freed from the constant drain of fending off manipulation and the internal conflicts of unexamined ego, our energy is now fully available for creative expression and service. We discover that true purpose is not something we, quote 50 out there, but something that naturally arises from a deep connection to our authentic self and a clear understanding of our unique gifts and passions. It is a purpose that is intrinsically motivating, requiring no external rewards or recognition, and therefore impervious to manipulative attempts to co-opt or derail it. The unshakable freedom we cultivate is not a freedom from responsibility or engagement, but a freedom to choose our response to every situation. It is an inner liberation that transcends external circumstances. We may still encounter challenges, setbacks, and even malevolence, but our internal state remains largely undisturbed. We possess an inner equilibrium, a profound peace that stems from knowing ourselves, trusting our discernment, and resting in the unassailable truth of our being. This freedom allows us to engage with the world with genuine compassion, understanding that the manipulators themselves are often deeply wounded individuals operating from a place of their own unaddressed pain and delusion. We can hold space for their humanity without condoning their actions or allowing them to infringe upon our sovereignty. Furthermore, this individual transformation inevitably expands its ripple effect into the collective consciousness, as Chapter 5 hinted. An awakened individual, living from a place of integrity and unshakable freedom, becomes a beacon. We do not necessarily preach or proselytize, but our very presence, our way of being in the world, subtly shifts the energy around us. We become living examples of what is possible when one chooses awareness over ignorance, truth over illusion, and sovereignty over subjugation. This allows us to engage with the broader systemic manipulations that permeate our societies, the pervasive influence of media narratives, the subtle pressures of consumerism, the political rhetoric designed to divide and conquer, from a place of grounded wisdom rather than reactive anger. We can discern the underlying agendas, understand the psychological hooks being deployed on a mass scale, and choose not to participate in the collective hypnosis. Our actions, whether through conscious consumption, informed voting, or simply holding a space of peace and clarity in our communities, contribute to a gradual raising of collective awareness. We become catalysts for change, not by force, but by the quiet power of our authentic presence. The journey of unmasking dark psychology and fortifying our inner world is, therefore, a lifelong commitment. It is a path of continuous growth, perpetual discovery, and ever-deepening liberation. Each new challenge, each subtle nuance we discern serves not as a threat, but as an opportunity to further refine our awareness and strengthen our connection to the authentic self. This ongoing practice is not a burden, but a source of profound joy and meaning, leading us further into a life of integrity, purpose, and an unshakable freedom that truly defines what it means to be fully, consciously human. The dawn continues to break, revealing more light with each passing moment, and our inner fortress stands, not as a wall against the world, but as a sanctuary from which we can engage with it, fully and fearlessly. Our journey into the intricate landscape of manipulation has thus far unveiled its pervasive nature, dissecting the psychological ploys and spiritual entanglements that render us vulnerable. We have diligently charted the blueprints of an inner fortress, a sanctuary forged from integrated psychological discernment and spiritual grounding. Yet, the Abdes Quote 51 where we spoke of is not merely a destination, but an ongoing process, a continuous unveiling of deeper truths, and a refinement of our defences against ever more subtle and systemic forms of influence. As the world evolves, so too do the tactics of manipulation, morphing from overt interpersonal ploys into the very fabric of our digital and cultural ecosystems. Our inner fortress, therefore, must not be a static monument, but a living, breathing entity, perpetually adapting, strengthening, and expanding its vigilant awareness. We now turn our gaze to these more insidious, often invisible, layers of dark psychology that weave themselves into our collective consciousness, shaping our perceptions and subtly directing our choices without our conscious consent. These are the manipulations that operate not just on an individual level, but on a grander scale, exploiting our collective biases and the very architecture of modern information flow. In an age increasingly defined by digital connectivity, a new potent arena for manipulation has emerged, the algorithmic echo chamber. We find ourselves immersed in vast networks of information, seemingly boundless in their scope, yet paradoxically narrowing our perspectives. The very systems designed to connect us often serve to isolate us within self-reinforcing bubbles of belief. This is a sophisticated form of Maya, a digitally rendered illusion that distorts our perception of reality by curating the information we receive. Algorithms, the unseen architects of our digital experience, are programmed to maximize engagement, and they achieve this by feeding us content that aligns with our pre-existing beliefs, preferences, and behaviors. This relentless reinforcement of what we already think we know powerfully exploits our confirmation bias, our inherent tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms our prior beliefs. When our feeds are saturated with content that echoes our own views, dissent or alternative perspectives become scarce, creating an intellectual and emotional echo chamber. We are subtly led to believe that our perspective is the universally accepted truth, or at least the dominant one, diminishing our capacity for critical thought and making us profoundly susceptible to narratives, however flawed, that resonate with our established convictions. Moreover, these digital environments leverage as social proof with immense efficacy. The visible endorsement of content by our peers, the sheer volume of quote 52 or quote 53, or the trending status of a particular topic, all signal its perceived validity and importance. This creates a powerful, often unconscious pressure to conform or to accept information as true simply because quote 54 appears to believe it. This collective affirmation can be subtly steered, making us vulnerable to manufactured consensus or astroturfing campaigns where coordinated efforts create an artificial sense of widespread support for a particular agenda. The result is a fractured reality, where different echo chambers foster divergent quote, making genuine dialogue and collective problem-solving increasingly challenging. To fortify our inner fortress against this digital deluge, we must cultivate a rigorous form of digital literacy and a conscious practice of information hygiene. This demands actively seeking out diverse perspectives, even and especially those that challenge our comfort zones. It means engaging with reputable sources that prioritize factual reporting over sensationalism, and critically evaluating the motivations behind the content we consume. We must regularly step outside our curated feeds, intentionally exposing ourselves to different viewpoints, not to adopt them, but to understand the broader spectrum of human thought. A periodic digital detox, or a conscious limitation of our screen time, can also serve as a powerful defense, allowing our minds to recalibrate and reconnect with the tangible, unfiltered reality of our immediate environment, thereby reducing the influence of the digital Maya. Our inner fortress here becomes a bastion of intellectual independence, refusing to be confined by the walls of an algorithmic prison. Beyond the digital realm, manipulation often cloaks itself in the guise of our noblest intentions and deepest human yearnings. We are inherently social creatures, wired for connection, empathy, and a desire to contribute positively to our communities. It is precisely these virtues, our compassion, our sense of justice, our loyalty, our longing for belonging, that can be subtly weaponized against us. This is where the manipulators often unconsciously exploit our egoic self, not through fear or greed, but through our aspirations for goodness and moral uprightness. Consider the phenomenon of virtue signaling, where individuals or groups publicly express moral stances not necessarily out of genuine conviction, but to enhance their own social standing or to shame others into compliance. When wielded manipulatively, virtue signaling can become a tool for coercion, creating an atmosphere where disagreeing with a particular stance, however nuanced one's reasoning, is framed as a moral failing or an indicator of a lack of empathy. We are made to feel guilty or morally inferior if we do not conform, if we question, or if our priorities differ. This tactic exploits our deep-seated desire to be perceived as good or righteous, making us hesitant to voice authentic concerns or set healthy boundaries, lest we be cast out from the moral high ground. Similarly, emotional blackmail often operates under the guise of care, love, or loyalty. A manipulator might say, "If you really loved me, you would," or "After all I've done for you, how could you possibly?" These statements, while seemingly appealing to our sense of duty or affection, are designed to induce guilt, obligation, or fear of abandonment. They leverage our empathy and our desire to maintain positive relationships, twisting these healthy human impulses into instruments of control. Our natural inclination to be supportive, understanding, and reciprocal is exploited, creating a dynamic where our emotional well-being becomes contingent upon fulfilling the manipulator's demands. This is a profound assault on our spiritual integrity, as it forces us to compromise our authentic self and our inner knowing for the sake of an external, conditional validation. To counter these subtle snares, Our inner fortress requires an acute discernment of intent. We must learn to differentiate between genuine expressions of compassion and manipulative appeals to our conscience. This involves cultivating a robust sense of self-compassion and self-worth that is not contingent upon external approval or the validation of others. We must develop the courage to hold our own moral compass, even when it means standing apart from perceived group consensus or risking disapproval. Setting healthy boundaries becomes paramount, even and especially with those who claim to act out of love or concern. We must learn to say, quote 60, without guilt, understanding that true love honors autonomy and respects individual needs, rather than demanding compliance. Our inner fortress in this context becomes a sanctuary of authentic self-expression, where our actions are guided by our inner truth, not by the fear of moral judgment or emotional coercion. Another pervasive yet subtle form of manipulation operates by creating an illusion of choice, where our perceived autonomy is carefully curated to funnel us towards a predetermined outcome. This tactic plays on our fundamental human need for control and self-determination, making us believe we are freely choosing, when in reality our options have been strategically limited or framed to guide our decision-making. This is a sophisticated dance with our cognitive biases, particularly our desire for agency, even if that agency is an illusion. We see this in political rhetoric, where complex issues are often reduced to false dichotomies. Quote 61. Eliminating the vast spectrum of nuanced perspectives and forcing us to choose between two pre-selected, often extreme options. In marketing, consumers might be presented with several product options, all designed to subtly steer them towards the most profitable choice for the company, or to create a false sense of variety while essentially offering the same core product. Even in personal relationships, a manipulator might present two undesirable options, framing them as the only available choices, thereby diverting attention from other, potentially more favorable alternatives that they wish to avoid. This manipulation thrives on our mental shortcuts and our tendency to accept the presented framework without questioning its origins or limitations. It capitalizes on our cognitive load, knowing that in a world overflowing with decisions, we often default to the path of least resistance or accept the options laid before us as exhaustive. The danger here lies not just in making a suboptimal choice, but in the insidious erosion of our true agency and critical thinking skills. Over time, we may become accustomed to having our choices curated, losing the muscle of independent exploration and the courage to seek alternatives outside the presented paradigm. To fortify our inner fortress against the illusion of choice, we must cultivate a profound sense of metacognition, thinking about our thinking. This involves consciously questioning the framing of any choice presented to us. Quote 62. We must actively resist the urge to immediately choose from the presented menu, and instead pause, reflect, and generate our own alternatives. This requires intellectual curiosity, a willingness to challenge the status quo, and the self-trust to believe that our own ingenuity can uncover pathways not immediately apparent. Our inner fortress, in this capacity, becomes a laboratory of independent thought, where we dissect presented realities and construct our own, unburdened by curated constraints. The inner fortress, as we have emphasized, is not a static structure but a living, dynamic defense system. Its strength and efficacy are directly proportional to our commitment to its perpetual maintenance. The subtle and systemic manipulations we have just explored underscore the necessity of continuous vigilance, for the landscape of influence is ever shifting. Even with the most robust external defenses, our own internal vulnerabilities, our unexamined nafs, our lingering attachments, tanha, our unhealed wounds, or our subconscious patterns, can still act as internal, quotus 63, providing an entry point for external manipulation. These internal saboteurs represent the most challenging frontier of our self-mastery. They are the echoes of past conditioning, the unresolved emotional residues, or the egoic desires that still whisper promises of comfort, validation, or escape from discomfort. A manipulator, astute in reading human nature, can subtly tap into these internal currents, stirring up old fears or desires to subtly steer our actions. For instance, a deep-seated fear of loneliness might make us overlook red flags in a relationship, or an unfulfilled desire for recognition might make us susceptible to flattery and grand promises. Therefore, the ongoing maintenance of our inner fortress demands a courageous and consistent practice of self-reflection and mindfulness. This is the spiritual groundwork that underpins all psychological defenses. Through practices of inner silence, meditation, and honest introspection, we bring conscious awareness to these hidden corners of our psyche. We identify the specific fears, desires, and attachments that still hold sway over us, and with compassionate detachment, we begin to loosen their grip. This is the process of genuine spiritual liberation, where we transcend the ego's demands and connect more deeply with our authentic, unconditioned self. It is a commitment to continuous self-discovery, acknowledging that the work of becoming truly free is never fully complete. As we consistently fortify and refine our inner fortress, a profound transformation begins to unfold. We transcend the reactive posture of mere defense and step into the proactive role of conscious co-creators of our reality. The clarity and unshakable integrity forged within our sanctuary do not lead to cynicism or isolation, but rather empower us to engage with the world from a place of profound wisdom and compassion. Our awareness of manipulation does not make us jaded. It makes us discerning. This shift allows us to become a catalyst for collective awakening, not through proselytizing or imposing our views on others, but through the sheer power of our authentic example. When we live from a place of genuine self-trust, grounded purpose, and unshakable inner peace, we radiate an energy that naturally inspires those around us. Our calm discernment in the face of manipulation, our unwavering commitment to truth, and our capacity for unconditional compassion become a beacon for others navigating their own complex landscapes. We demonstrate, through our very being, that freedom from manipulation is not only possible but profoundly liberating. We learn to engage with the world's imperfections and challenges not from a place of fear, but from a place of empowered choice. We can observe manipulative patterns in others with dispassionate understanding, recognizing them as expressions of their own unexamined nafs or unhealed wounds rather than personal attacks. This allows us to respond with wisdom, setting firm boundaries while maintaining an open heart and choosing to contribute to solutions rather than becoming entangled in the problems. The ultimate freedom granted by our inner fortress is the freedom to choose our reality, to design a life aligned with our highest values, and to contribute to the collective good from a place of genuine strength and clarity. It is a dynamic engagement with life, an ongoing dance between vigilance and compassion, discernment and connection. Our journey, therefore, is not merely about escaping the clutches of dark psychology, but about harnessing our inherent power to become architects of a more conscious, authentic, and liberated world. The inner fortress, far from being a retreat, becomes the launching pad for a life lived with profound purpose and unshakable connection. Our journey thus far has peeled back layers of illusion, revealing the intricate tapestry of dark psychology tricks woven into the fabric of our daily existence. We have charted the terrain of overt manipulation, the gaslighting, the love bombing, the scarcity tactics, and ventured into the more subtle landscapes of digital echo chambers, virtue signaling, emotional blackmail, and the illusion of choice. Yet the path to true liberation is not a destination, but a continuous expedition. For the architects of manipulation are not static. They are adaptive, ever-evolving, refining their craft as our collective awareness grows. This ongoing challenge necessitates a perpetual need for vigilance and refinement, not merely of our external defences, but more profoundly of our internal landscape. For as we fortify our outer fortress against external assaults, we must simultaneously confront the lingering shadows within, the unexamined ego, the residual attachments, the unaddressed fears, which remain fertile ground for the most insidious forms of influence. As we become adept at recognizing the overt ploys, manipulators, often unconsciously, pivot to more sophisticated and less discernible methods. They move from direct coercion to subtle conditioning, from explicit demands to implicit suggestions, operating at the fringes of our perception. This evolution demands a deeper level of discernment from us, a sensitivity to the nuanced shifts in communication, the subliminal cues, and the systemic pressures that seek to shape our beliefs and behaviors without our conscious consent. Consider the pervasive influence of, quote Justin 64, manipulation, where compliance is elicited not through force or even direct persuasion, but by shaping the environment, framing narratives, and subtly guiding choices to align with a desired agenda. This can manifest in the design of social media algorithms that curate our feeds to reinforce existing biases, or in marketing strategies that tap into our aspirational selves, promising belonging or status through consumption. We are not told what to think, but rather presented with a carefully curated reality that nudges us towards certain conclusions, certain desires, certain identities. The illusion of agency remains intact, even as our choices are subtly preordained. Another evolving tactic is the exploitation of our innate human need for belonging and social validation, morphing into the illusion of consensus. Manipulators, whether individuals or institutions, can engineer an artificial sense of widespread agreement or popularity around a particular idea, product, or candidate. Through carefully curated testimonials, manufactured trending topics, or the amplification of specific viewpoints while suppressing others, they create a powerful current of social proof. We are wired to conform, to trust the collective wisdom, and when confronted with what appears to be an overwhelming consensus, our critical faculties can be dulled. The fear of being an outlier, of standing apart from the perceived majority, can be a potent, silent weapon, compelling us to adopt beliefs or behaviours that are not truly our own. This is not merely about, quote 65, it is about feeling psychologically compelled to join the perceived, quote 66-60 side, even if that side is a carefully constructed mirage. However, the most formidable frontier in our defense against dark psychology lies not in external tactics, but within the intricate landscape of our own psyche. Our, quote 67, can never be truly impregnable if its foundations are undermined by unaddressed internal shadows. These are the unconscious biases, the lingering attachments, the unhealed wounds, and the unexamined aspects of our ego that remain susceptible to subtle exploitation. Unexamined ego. While we have discussed the ego's role in creating vulnerabilities like the need for validation or superiority, its deeper, unexamined aspects can be even more treacherous. The ego's fear of insignificance, its craving for recognition, its attachment to specific self-narratives, these are the subtle, quote 68, that manipulators can latch onto. A manipulator might praise a specific trait we secretly pride ourselves on, knowing it will make us more amenable to their suggestions. They might subtly challenge a belief we hold dear, knowing our ego will rise to defend it, often leading us to double down on our position even against our better judgment. The constant self-inquiry, the willingness to question our own motivations and attachments, becomes paramount in disarming these internal vulnerabilities. Lingering attachments. Beyond the ego, our attachments to outcomes, relationships, or even specific identities can be expertly leveraged. If we are deeply attached to a particular vision of our future, a manipulator might offer to be the quotier 69 to unlocking it, creating a dependency. If we are attached to a certain relationship, emotional blackmail can hold us hostage. Spiritual traditions emphasize detachment, vairagya, not as apathy, but as a liberation from the suffering caused by craving, tanha. This detachment, cultivated through mindfulness and self-awareness, allows us to observe our desires without being enslaved by them, thus closing a significant gateway for manipulation. Unhealed wounds and core beliefs. Perhaps the deepest vulnerabilities stem from unhealed psychological wounds or deeply ingrained core beliefs, often formed in childhood, about our worthiness, safety, or belonging. A manipulator with keen observation can identify these raw spots and exploit them. They might play on our fear of abandonment by threatening to withdraw affection, or leverage our belief that we are not, quote 70, by subtly undermining our confidence. Healing these wounds, often through therapeutic work or profound self-reflection, is not just about personal well-being. It is a critical act of self-defense, rendering us less susceptible to those who would prey on our deepest insecurities. Recognizing these evolving tactics and confronting our internal shadows underscores the truth that cultivating resilience against dark psychology is a lifelong practice. It is not a one-time immunization, but a continuous process of learning, adapting, and refining our internal and external defenses. This lifelong practice involves several key disciplines. Continuous self-inquiry, regularly questioning our own thoughts, emotions, and motivations. Why do we feel compelled to say yes? What fear drives this decision? Is this truly our desire, or an echo of someone else's? Cultivating emotional intelligence, moving beyond simply identifying emotions to understanding their origins, their triggers, and how they can be steered. This allows us to recognize when our emotions are being intentionally provoked and to respond with conscious awareness rather than reactive impulsivity. Active boundary maintenance. Our boundaries are not static fences. They are dynamic perimeters that require constant monitoring and adjustment. As manipulators evolve, so too must our capacity to assert and defend our personal, energetic, and spiritual space. Embracing discomfort. Growth often lies beyond our comfort zone. Confronting our internal shadows can be uncomfortable, even painful. Yet, embracing this discomfort as a necessary step towards liberation allows us to integrate fragmented aspects of ourselves, making us whole and less prone to external fragmentation by manipulative forces. Deepening spiritual connection. Ultimately, our most potent defense lies in our connection to our authentic self, our inner truth, our spiritual core. This connection provides an unwavering anchor amidst the stormy seas of external influence. It is the compass that guides us through the fog of deception, allowing us to discern truth from illusion, authentic connection from exploitative entanglement. As individuals, our commitment to this lifelong practice extends beyond personal liberation. Each time we dismantle a manipulative tactic, each time we heal an internal wound, each time we choose authenticity over conformity, we contribute to a broader shift in collective consciousness. When enough individuals stand firm in their truth, the efficacy of dark psychology begins to wane. The illusion of consensus cracks, the power of fear dissipates, and the manipulative games lose their potency. Our journey from potential target to sovereign architect of our reality is not a solitary one. By embodying unshakable freedom, integrity, and purpose, we become beacons for others. Our authentic presence, grounded in self-awareness and spiritual discernment, inspires those around us to embark on their own journeys of awakening. This ripple effect is the ultimate countermeasure to the pervasive darkness of manipulation, a collective rise in consciousness that renders such tactics increasingly ineffective, paving the way for a world built on genuine connection, mutual respect, and shared truth. The ongoing challenge is indeed perpetual, but so too is the potential for profound transformation, both within ourselves and in the world we inhabit. Our journey thus far has navigated the intricate external landscape of manipulative tactics, from the subtle whispers of gaslighting to the overt pressures of scarcity. We have meticulously constructed a psychological armor and fortified ourselves with spiritual defenses, building an inner fortress designed to withstand the incessant barrage of external influences. Yet, as we delve deeper into the mechanics of true liberation, we confront the ultimate frontier of defense, the internal landscape of our own being. This is where the most insidious forms of manipulation find their purchase, not through external force, but by exploiting the unexamined vulnerabilities within. The true battleground, we discover, is not solely in the world outside us, but within the very architecture of our minds and hearts. Here, manipulators, often unconsciously, find their most potent allies in our own internal shadows. The unexamined ego, nafs, the lingering attachments, tanha, and the unhealed psychological wounds that reside in the hidden corners of our psyche. These are not merely weaknesses, they are the mental hooks, the emotional tripwires, and the spiritual blind spots that render us susceptible, even when our external defenses appear impregnable. They are the Trojan horses within our own walls, allowing the illusioned Maya to take root and flourish from the inside out. Consider the unexamined ego, nafs, that self-serving aspect of our being that craves validation, fears rejection, and clings to self-image. It is the part of us that can be flattered, shamed, or provoked into making decisions that serve an external agenda rather than our authentic self. A manipulator skilled in the art of praise or subtle critique can easily bypass our rational defenses by speaking directly to our ego's desires or insecurities. When we are unaware of the ego's subtle machinations, we become puppets to its whims, and thus to those who understand how to pull its strings. Similarly, lingering attachments, tanya, our desires for material possessions, social status, specific outcomes, or even certain relationships, become profound vulnerabilities. The fear of loss, the craving for acquisition, or the desperate need for acceptance can be expertly leveraged. If we are deeply attached to a particular identity or outcome, a manipulator can subtly threaten its removal or promise its fulfillment, compelling us to act against our better judgment. These attachments create a dependency, a spiritual tether that can be pulled and yanked, leading us away from our own truth. Finally, unhealed psychological wounds. Past traumas, unresolved conflicts, or deeply ingrained insecurities form the most sensitive points of entry. These wounds are like open sores, easily inflamed by a manipulator who knows how to press on them. A person who experienced childhood neglect might be particularly susceptible to love bombing, mistaking intense, fleeting affection for genuine connection. Someone with a history of betrayal might be manipulated through false promises of loyalty. These wounds create patterns of reaction, often subconscious, that can be exploited to predict and control our responses. They are the chinks in our armor, forged not by external attack but by the unaddressed pain within. Confronting these internal shadows demands a lifelong practice of unwavering self-refinement. It is not a one-time revelation, but a continuous iterative process of peeling back layers, examining our motivations and healing the old hurts. This journey requires courage, vulnerability, and an unshakable commitment to truth, both within and without. Central to this practice is continuous self-inquiry. This involves a rigorous, honest examination of our thoughts, emotions, and reactions. When we feel a strong emotional pull, be it anger, fear, desire, or shame, we must pause and ask, why am I reacting this way? What underlying belief or unfulfilled need is driving this response? Is this truly my authentic voice? Or is it the whisper of my ego, an old wound, or a deeply ingrained attachment? This introspective questioning, akin to a spiritual meditation, allows us to discern the origin of our internal states, separating genuine self from conditioned response, and thereby disarming the manipulator's potential leverage. It is through this constant self-reflection that we begin to dismantle the internal illusions, Maya, that obscure our true nature. Hand in hand with self-inquiry is the cultivation of the emotional intelligence and regulation. It is not enough to simply identify our emotions. We must learn to understand their nuances, their triggers, and their impact on our decision-making. Emotional regulation involves developing the capacity to experience intense emotions without being overwhelmed or controlled by them. This means creating a space between stimulus and response, allowing us to choose a conscious reaction rather than a knee-jerk one. When we can skillfully navigate our own emotional landscape, the manipulator's attempts to provoke fear, guilt, or desire fall flat, losing their power to sway us. We become the masters of our inner world rather than its unwitting servants. Furthermore, the practice extends to all active boundary maintenance, both external and internal. While we have previously discussed setting boundaries with others, the ultimate frontier demands we set boundaries with ourselves. This means establishing limits on what thoughts we entertain, what narratives we allow to define us, and what self-sabotaging behaviors we permit. It's about protecting our internal space from the insidious whispers of self-doubt, the persistent pull of old habits, and the seductive allure of external validation. By actively curating our inner environment, we create a sanctuary where our authentic self can thrive, unburdened by internal noise and external pressures. This path, however, is not always comfortable. In fact, it often demands embracing discomfort. Confronting our shadows means acknowledging our imperfections, facing our fears, and revisiting painful memories. This can be deeply unsettling, challenging our self-perceptions and forcing us to sit with vulnerability. Yet it is precisely in these moments of discomfort that true growth occurs. Just as a muscle strengthens under strain, our spiritual and psychological resilience is forged in the crucible of honest self-examination and emotional processing. To shy away from this discomfort is to leave our wounds unhealed, forever accessible to those who would exploit them. Ultimately, this entire process is underpinned by deepening spiritual connection. Whether through meditation, prayer, mindfulness, or communion with nature, cultivating a connection to something larger than our individual ego provides an anchor in the turbulent seas of self-discovery. This spiritual grounding offers perspective, reminding us of our inherent worth and interconnectedness, transcending the temporary fluctuations of egoic desires and external validation. It is the source of inner peace and wisdom that illuminates our shadows, guides our self-inquiry, and empowers our emotional regulation. This connection transforms our inner fortress from a mere defensive structure into a vibrant living sanctuary. When we commit to this profound individual transformation, the impact extends far beyond our personal liberation. As we shed the layers of illusion and manipulation, embracing our authentic selves, we begin to radiate a different kind of energy. Our interactions become more genuine, our relationships more sincere, and our presence more empowering. This creates a ripple effect, inspiring a collective awakening in those around us. When others witness our unwavering commitment to truth and self-awareness, they too are often moved to embark on their own journeys of introspection and liberation. We become beacons of conscious living, contributing to a world built on genuine connection, mutual respect, and shared truth, rather than one founded on exploitation and hidden agendas. In this context, the inner fortress just is not a retreat from the world, a place to hide in isolation. Instead, it transforms into a powerful launch pad for a life lived with profound purpose and unshakable connection. From this secure and integrated core, we can engage with the world more fully, authentically, and effectively. We are no longer reactive targets, but proactive architects of our reality, capable of discerning truth from falsehood, navigating complex social dynamics with grace, and contributing to the collective good from a place of genuine strength. Our decisions stem from clarity, not compulsion, our relationships from love, not manipulation, and our actions from purpose, not fear. This is the ultimate promise of our journey, to not only free ourselves from the chains of dark psychology, but to become agents of positive change. By mastering our internal landscape, by bravely confronting our shadows and diligently cultivating our inner light, we not only build an impregnable fortress, but also ignite a beacon that guides others towards their own liberation. This continuous process of self-refinement is the highest form of defense, transforming us into conscious, compassionate, and powerful beings, ready to face the world with an open heart and an unshakable spirit. It is a testament to the enduring human capacity for growth, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Our journey thus far has traversed the intricate landscape of manipulation, from its insidious psychological roots to its subtle spiritual implications. We have meticulously deconstructed the tactics of those who seek to exploit our vulnerabilities and, in response, have begun the vital work of constructing our inner fortress, a sanctuary of psychological resilience and spiritual discernment. Yet, to perceive this fortress as a static, completed edifice would be a profound miscalculation, a dangerous oversight that could render us susceptible to the very influences we seek to transcend. Instead, we must understand our inner fortress not as a destination, but as a perpetual dawn, an ongoing process of cultivation, refinement, and expansion. The true mastery lies not in building it once, but in maintaining it dynamically, a living entity that evolves with our awareness and the ever-shifting currents of human interaction. This chapter delves into the continuous nature of self-mastery, exploring the practices that transform the inner fortress from a defensive structure into a vibrant, unshakable core of being. We will examine the necessity of continuous self-inquiry, the art of dynamic internal boundary maintenance, the profound wisdom found in embracing discomfort, and the deepening spiritual connection that ultimately anchors our freedom. This is the Jasuntis quote 72. We spoke of earlier, the dynamic, lifelong commitment to growth that ensures our sovereignty against both external machinations and the persistent internal shadows that linger within. It is through this perpetual engagement that we not only safeguard our integrity, but also become catalysts for authentic change in the world. The initial act of self-inquiry might feel like excavating ancient ruins, uncovering long-buried truths. However, true self-mastery demands that this excavation never ceases. It transforms into a continuous conscious process of peeling back layers, each revelation leading to a deeper understanding of our internal architecture. Our nafs, our ego self, is a master of camouflage, adapting its strategies as our awareness grows. What once manifested as overt insecurity might now appear as subtle self-righteousness. What was once clear attachment, tanha, might now be disguised as a noble aspiration. Without continuous scrutiny, these newly disguised vulnerabilities can become fresh. Quote 73. For manipulation, both from others and from our own conditioned responses. This ongoing self-inquiry requires an unwavering commitment to radical honesty. It means consistently asking ourselves, why did I react that way? What unconscious belief was triggered? Is this desire truly mine, or an echo of external conditioning? Where do I still seek validation outside myself? Tools for this perpetual introspection are diverse and potent. Regular journaling, not merely as a record of events, but as a dialogue with the deeper self, allows us to track patterns, challenge assumptions, and uncover emerging shadow aspects. Mindfulness and contemplative practices, beyond their initial use in calming the mind, become sophisticated instruments for observing thought processes and emotional currents without immediate judgment, revealing the subtle ways our ego attempts to reassert control. Furthermore, cultivating relationships with trusted, discerning individuals who can offer honest, constructive feedback becomes invaluable. These external mirrors, free from our internal biases, can gently highlight blind spots that our own introspection might miss, accelerating our journey toward comprehensive self-awareness. This process is not always comfortable. It often necessitates confronting aspects of ourselves that we would prefer to keep hidden, the small envies, the lingering resentments, the subtle fears that drive certain behaviors. But it is precisely in this crucible of self-confrontation that our inner fortress is forged anew, each layer of self-deception stripped away, strengthening its core. We have previously discussed the critical role of external boundaries in protecting our energy and autonomy. However, the continuous refinement of our inner fortress demands an equally rigorous and dynamic approach to internal boundary maintenance. This involves establishing and enforcing clear demarcations within our own consciousness, preventing invasive thoughts, emotions, and past conditioning from hijacking our present experience and future trajectory. Just as we wouldn't allow an unwelcome intruder into our physical space, we must develop a sophisticated internal sentry duty to guard the sanctity of our inner world. This manifests as a constant metacognitive awareness of our internal dialogue. We learn to identify and challenge negative self-talk, differentiating between constructive self-assessment and destructive self-criticism. We establish boundaries against rumination, preventing past hurts or future anxieties from consuming our mental bandwidth. This isn't about suppression, but about conscious redirection and transformation. For instance, when a thought arises that triggers feelings of inadequacy, instead of identifying with it, we can acknowledge its presence, trace its likely origin, perhaps a past experience or societal conditioning, and then consciously choose not to dwell on it, instead affirming our inherent worth. This requires a high degree of emotional intelligence, not just recognizing an emotion, but understanding its genesis, its purpose, and its potential to be exploited, even by our own internal narratives, then regulating its influence rather than being swept away by it. Dynamic internal boundary maintenance also involves actively challenging our own cognitive biases. The confirmation bias, for example, can lead us to seek out information that validates existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are detrimental or based on flawed premises. An internal boundary here would involve a conscious commitment to seeking diverse perspectives, entertaining contradictory evidence, and rigorously questioning our own assumptions. This continuous vigilance prevents our minds from becoming echo chambers for self-limiting beliefs or external narratives that have subtly infiltrated our consciousness. It is a proactive stance, ensuring that the inner fortress remains an impregnable sanctuary of clarity and self-trust, not a prison of unexamined conditioning. In a world increasingly engineered for comfort and immediate gratification, the capacity to embrace discomfort stands as a radical act of liberation and a cornerstone of the robust inner fortress. Manipulators thrive on our aversion to discomfort, using it as leverage to push us into compliance, fear of confrontation, fear of missing out, FOMO, fear of rejection, fear of change. These are all manifestations of our innate desire for ease, and they are expertly exploited. Therefore, actively leaning into discomfort, rather than reflexively retreating from it, becomes a powerful practice of self-fortification. This doesn't imply seeking out pain or hardship unnecessarily, but rather recognizing that growth often resides just beyond the edge of our comfort zone. It means consciously choosing to engage in difficult conversations that are necessary for authentic relationships, even when our nafs urges us to avoid conflict. It means sitting with the uncomfortable uncertainty of new ventures, rather than clinging to the perceived safety of the familiar, which might be a trap. It means tolerating the internal tension that arises when we challenge our own long-held beliefs, rather than dismissing discordant information. The practice of vairagya, or detachment, extends beyond material possessions to include detachment from the craving for perpetual ease and the illusion of control. When we intentionally expose ourselves to mild, manageable forms of discomfort, be it through pushing our physical limits, learning a new skill that initially feels frustrating, or simply sitting in silence with our own thoughts, we build a deeper reservoir of resilience. We learn that discomfort is a temporary state, not a permanent threat. We cultivate a profound self-trust, realizing that we possess the inner resources to navigate challenging internal and external landscapes. This wisdom of discomfort transforms our relationship with fear and anxiety. They become signals to explore rather than walls to retreat from. Each time we consciously choose to step into the uncomfortable, we reinforce the inner fortress with an unshakable sense of our own strength and adaptability, making us far less susceptible to manipulative tactics that prey on our desire for ease. While psychological tools provide the architecture for our inner fortress, the deepest, most unshakable foundation is laid by a continuous and deepening spiritual connection. This is the ultimate defense against the most subtle forms of manipulation, those that aim to sever us from our authentic self, our inherent worth, and our connection to a greater truth. Spiritual connection, in this context, transcends dogma. It is the active cultivation of an inner state of peace, clarity, and unconditional love that emanates from our core being. This deepening connection is not a one-time event, but an unfolding tapestry, woven through sustained practices that align us with our higher self. This includes extended periods of inner silence, where the incessant chatter of the ego mind, nafs, can subside, allowing the voice of intuition and wisdom to emerge. It involves practices of gratitude, compassion, and selfless service, which naturally dissolve the self-centeredness that manipulators exploit. As we consciously cultivate these qualities, our perception of Maya, the veil of illusion, becomes increasingly transparent. We begin to discern the ephemeral nature of external validation, material pursuits, and egoic desires, realizing that true fulfillment resides in our intrinsic spiritual essence. This spiritual deepening fosters an inherent sense of belonging and purpose that is immune to external influence. When our sense of self is anchored in something transcendent, the attempts of others to define us, to control us through shame or guilt, or to lure us with promises of fleeting happiness, lose their power. We become less reactive, not because we are suppressing emotions, but because our emotional responses are filtered through a lens of profound inner peace and wisdom. This sustained connection to our spiritual core is the wellspring of unshakable calm amidst chaos, the source of unwavering integrity even in the face of immense pressure. It is the ultimate liberation, transforming us from individuals susceptible to external forces into conscious co-creators of our reality, guided by an inner compass that points unerringly toward truth and authenticity. The continuous cultivation of the inner fortress, through relentless self-inquiry, dynamic internal boundary maintenance, the embrace of discomfort, and a deepening spiritual connection, culminates in a state of profound, unshakable freedom, integrity, and purpose. This is not merely a theoretical ideal, but a lived reality, a transformative shift in our very way of being in the world. We move beyond merely defending ourselves against manipulation. We transcend the need for constant defense because our internal landscape has become so robust, so clear, and so aligned with truth that manipulative attempts simply lose their grip. This unshakable freedom manifests as an inner peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. We become capable of navigating complex relationships and challenging situations with grace and discernment, no longer easily swayed by emotional appeals or deceptive narratives. Our integrity becomes an intrinsic quality, informing every decision and interaction, rooted in an authentic self-trust that requires no external validation. And from this deep wellspring of freedom and integrity emerges a profound sense of purpose. Not a purpose dictated by societal expectations or the need for external recognition, but one that flows organically from our authentic being, guiding us toward actions that resonate with our highest values and contribute positively to the collective. In this state of continuous refinement, we cease to be merely recipients of influence and become instead architects of our own reality and catalysts for positive change. Our presence alone, imbued with this newfound clarity and authenticity, can inspire others. We become living examples of what is possible when one commits to the lifelong journey of self-mastery. The ripple effect of our individual liberation extends outward, subtly but powerfully, contributing to a collective awakening where awareness and genuine connection begin to dismantle the pervasive structures of manipulation. The journey of the inner fortress is thus never truly finished. It is a perpetual dawn, an ongoing unfolding of potential, leading us toward an ever-expanding horizon of wisdom, compassion, and unyielding sovereignty.